Wing, or terp, arms. Wing at ease. Ladies and gentlemen, the Staff Chaplain, Colonel Robert R. Gilman.
Let us pray. Gracious God, hear us as we pray for all who proudly and bravely serve and preserve the United States of America. We especially pray today for these glorious young men and women whom we now name before you. The United States Air Force Academy, class of 1995. As they depart to accept the honor and duty of military leadership, go with them. As they commit their lives to the defense of freedom and justice, be with them. And as they face the challenges of the future, stand with them. Keep their light bright and their vision clear, holding them secure in a strength beyond their own. And dear Lord, as we bid them farewell, grant them the faith to welcome every challenge of their high adventure, knowing with your guidance, nothing can stop the U.S. Air Force. Amen.
Graduates and wing, take seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the Superintendent of the United States Air Force Academy, Lieutenant General Paul E. Stein.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning to the class of 1995. Welcome to the graduation of the 37th class at the United States Air Force Academy. Let me open by welcoming our distinguished guests, friends and family of the Academy, and particularly those on our speakers' platform. To your left and our right, my right, we are honored and delighted to have as our commencement speaker, for only the second time in 11 years, the President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, our Commander-in-Chief, the Honorable William J. Clinton. No, not yet, Mr. President. Mr. President, if I may speak on behalf of everybody at the Academy, the family and friends, and the entire gathering here, we are immensely proud that you could make time in your schedule to be with us today. This is a memorable occasion for all of the graduates and their families, even more so because of your presence, and we thank you. I'll continue by introducing the rest of our special guests, and may I ask that you hold your applause until everyone on the platform has been introduced. Next to the President is Mr. Anthony Lake, Special Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. Next is the Honorable Sheila E. Widnall, Secretary of the Air Force. Moving to the right of center is the Honorable Roy Romer, Governor of Colorado. Next to Governor Romer is the Honorable Jim Ramstad, United States Representative from Minnesota. Next, General Ronald R. Fogelman, Chief of Staff of our Air Force, and Mrs. Fogelman. Seated next is Mr. Bob Bell, Special Assistant to the President for National Security and Senior Director for Defense Policies and Arms Control. In the second row, just left of center, is the Honorable Deborah Lee, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs. Our next distinguished guest is Lieutenant General Albert P. Bub Clark, United States Air Force retired, and the 6th Superintendent of the United States Air Force Academy, and Mrs. Clark. Next is Brigadier General John D. Hopper, Commandant of Cadets and Commander of the 34th Training Wing, and Mrs. Hopper. Moving to the right of center, Mr. Bill Hibble, President of the Air Force Academy Foundation. Next to Mr. Hibble is Mrs. Dorothy Mahler, a very special friend of the Air Force Academy. Next, Lieutenant General Ben Bellis, United States Air Force retired, President of the Falcon Foundation, and Mrs. Bellis. Next, Brigadier General Ruben A. Cabero, Dean of Faculty, and Mrs. Cabero. In the third row, left of center, is Colonel Kenneth L. Schweitzer, Director of Athletics, and Mrs. Schweitzer. Next, Colonel Victor C. Andrews, Vice Superintendent, and Mrs. Andrews. Seated to the right of center is Brigadier General James Ulm, U.S. Air Force retired, President of the Air Force Academy Associations of Graduates, and Mrs. Ulm. Next is Colonel David P. Sintain, Commander of the 10th Air Base Wing, and Mrs. Sintain. And finally, seated in front by the President is my wife, Carol. Please give a warm welcome to our most distinguished guests. To your left on the stadium floor are other visiting dignitaries to the Air Force Academy. And time does not permit me to introduce them individually, but we sincerely appreciate their presence at this ceremony. Also seated on the floor of the stadium to your right are the permanent professors, distinguished visiting professors, department heads, and senior staff members at the Academy. The enduring strength of this institution rests on the quality of its faculty and staff. Would the permanent professors, faculty, Air Officer Commanding, and senior staff members please rise and be recognized. To the class of 1995, congratulations. You have a lot to be proud of, and so do your family and friends. Today, you are joining the profession of arms in the most respected air and space force in the world. Your experiences here help develop a broad and strong foundation for the role you are undertaking. It will serve you well because the challenges before you are many and they are substantial. The core values you have lived with here, integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do, will underpin both your professional and personal success. You have demonstrated to each other and to this nation that you are ready for the responsibilities which lie ahead. You are the new beginnings of our Air Force, 987 strong. I wish you good luck and great careers. At this time, I would like to introduce our guest speaker. A fifth-generation Arkansan, William Jefferson Clinton was born in August of 1946. He earned his bachelor's degree from Georgetown University in 1968, studied as a Rhodes Scholar. He then earned a law degree from Yale University Law School in 1973. In 1976, he was elected Attorney General of Arkansas. 2 years later, at the age of 32, he was elected governor of the state of Arkansas. He served as governor for 5 terms until his election to the presidency in 1992. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure and great honor to introduce our guest speaker, the 42nd President of the United States and our Commander-in-Chief, William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, General Stein. That's my home state cheer for those of you unused to foreign languages being spoken here in Falcon Stadium. Thank you very much. General Stein, thank you. Secretary Widnall, General Fogelman, Governor Romer, Congressman Ramstad, to the distinguished faculty and staff, to the proud parents, family, and friends, to the members of the Cadet Wing, we gather here to celebrate this very important moment in your life and in the life of our nation. Gentlemen and gentle ladies of this class, the Pride of '95, this is your day, and you are only one speech, one pretty short speech, away from being second lieutenant. I am honored to share this day with some exceptionally accomplished alumni of the Air Force Academy. General Fogelman, the first of your graduates to be the Air Force Chief of Staff. General Hopper, the first African-American graduate of the Academy to serve as the Commandant of Cadets. And a member of my staff, Robert Bell, who is the first graduate of the Air Force Academy to be the Senior Director for Defense Policy and Arms Control at the National Security Council. As I look out at all of you, I imagine it won't be too long before there's a graduate of the Air Force Academy in the Oval Office. If it's all the same to you, I'd like to delay it for just a few years. I also want to congratulate the Air Force Academy on extending its lock on the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. Here that I'm in your stadium, I think I ought to mention that. Your winning squad came to see me in the White House not very long ago, and I said that before I became president, I didn't understand that when I heard that the Commander-in-Chief's trophy was a traveling trophy, that meant it was supposed to go back and forth between Washington and Colorado Springs every year. I want to do my part in another long-standing tradition. With the power vested in me as Commander-in-Chief, I hereby grant amnesty to cadets who are marching tours or serving restrictions or confinements for minor misconduct. Now, General Stein, I have to leave it to you to decide which offenses are minor. But on this day, even in this conservative age, I trust you will be fairly liberal in your interpretation of the term. Members of the class of 1995, you are about to become officers in the United States Air Force. You should be very proud of what you have already accomplished, but you should be sobered by the important responsibilities you are about to assume. From this day forward, every day, you must defend our nation, protect the lives of the men and women under your command, and represent the best of America. I want to say here as an aside, I have seen something of the debate in the last few days on the question of whether in this time of necessity to cut budgets, we ought to close one of the service academies. And I just want to say I think that's one of the worst ideas I ever heard of. It was General Eisenhower who, as president, along with the Congress, so long ago now, recognized that national defense required a national commitment to education. But our commitment through the service academies to the education and preparation of the finest military officers in the world must never wane. And I hope your commitment to the cause of education is an important element in what makes our country great and strong and safe will never wane. As president, my first responsibility is to protect and enhance the safety of the American people and to strengthen our country. It is a responsibility that you now have chosen to share. So today, I thought what we ought to do is talk about the steps that we will have to take together to make the world safer for America in the 21st century. Our security objectives over the last 50 years have been dictated by straightforward events, often beyond our control. But at least they were straightforward and clear. In World War II, the objective was simple: win the war. In the Cold War, the objective was clear: contain communism and prevent nuclear war. In the post-Cold War world, the objectives are often more complex, and it is clear that American security in the 21st century will be determined by forces that are operating both beyond and within our own borders. While the world you will face is far from free of danger, you must know that you are entering active service in a moment of enormous hope. We are dramatically reducing the nuclear threat. For the first time since the dawn of the nuclear age, there are no Russian missiles pointed at the people of the United States. From the Middle East to South Africa to Northern Ireland, Americans are helping former adversaries turn from conflict to cooperation. We are supporting democracies and market economies like Haiti and Mexico in our own region and others throughout the world. We are expanding trade. We are working for a Europe allied with the United States, but unified economically and politically for the first time since nation-states appeared on the European continent. Just yesterday, Russia's decision to actively participate in NATO's Partnership for Peace helped to lay the groundwork for yet another important step in establishing a secure, stable, and unified European continent for the next century. Clearly, there are powerful historical forces pulling us together: a worldwide thirst for freedom and democracy, a growing commitment to market economics, a technological revolution that moves information, ideas, money, and people around the globe at record speed. All these things are bringing us together and helping to make our future more secure. But these same forces have a dark underside, which can also lead to more insecurity. We understand now that the openness and freedom of society make us even more vulnerable to the organized forces of destruction, the forces of terror and organized crime and drug trafficking. The technological revolution that is bringing our world closer together can also bring more and more problems to our shores. The end of communism has opened the door to the spread of weapons of mass destruction and lifted the lid on age-old conflicts rooted in ethnic, racial, and religious hatreds. These forces can be all the more destructive today because they have access to modern technology. Nowhere are the forces of disintegration more obvious today than in Bosnia. For the past 2.5 years, the United States has sought to contain and end the conflict, to help to preserve the Bosnian nation as a multi-state entity, multi-ethnic entity, to keep faith with our NATO allies, and to relieve human suffering. To these ends, we have led the NATO military responses to calls by the United Nations for assistance in the protection of its forces and safe areas for the people of Bosnia, led efforts to achieve a negotiated settlement, deployed peacekeeping troops to the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia to contain the conflict within the present borders of Bosnia, and conducted the longest humanitarian airlift to the people there in history. 2 weeks ago, the Bosnian Serbs unleashed 1,400 shells on the civilians of Sarajevo. The United Nations called this attack a return to medieval barbarism. They asked for a NATO air response, which we supported. Now we have joined our allies to develop a coordinated response to the Serbs' continued refusal to make peace and their illegal capturing of United Nations personnel as hostages. We believe still that a strengthened United Nations operation is the best insurance against an even worse humanitarian disaster should they leave. We have a long-standing commitment to help our NATO allies, some of whom have troops in the UN operation in Bosnia, to take part in a NATO operation to assist them in a withdrawal if that should ever become necessary. And so, if necessary, and after consultation with Congress, I believe we should be prepared to assist NATO if it decides to meet a request from the United Nations troops for help in a withdrawal or a reconfiguration and a strengthening of its forces. We have received no such request for any such assistance, and we have made no such decision. But in any event, we must know that we must continue to work for peace there. And I still believe that we have made the right decision in not committing our own troops to become embroiled in this conflict in Europe, nor to join the United Nations operations. So, I want to say to you, we have obligations to our NATO allies, and I do not believe we can leave them in the lurch. So I must carefully review any request for an operation involving a temporary use of our ground forces. But we have made the right decision in what we have done and what we have not done in Bosnia. I believe we must look at all of these problems and all these opportunities in new and different ways. For example, we see today that the clear boundaries between threats to our nation's security from beyond our borders and the challenges to our security from within our borders are being blurred. One once was clearly the province of the armed services, the other clearly the province of local law enforcement. Today we see people from overseas coming to our country for terrorist purposes, blurring what is our national security. We must see the threats for what they are and fashion our response based on their true nature, not just where they occur. In these new and different times, we must pursue three priorities to enhance our security. First, we have to combat those who would destroy democratic societies, including ours, through terrorism, organized crime, and drug trafficking. Secondly, we have to reduce the threat of weapons of mass destruction, whether they're nuclear, chemical, or biological. Third, we have to provide our military, you and people like you, with the resources, training, and strategic direction necessary to protect the American people and our interests around the world. The struggle against the forces of terror, organized crime, and drug trafficking is now uppermost on our minds because of what we have endured as a nation. The World Trade Center bombing, the terrible incident in Oklahoma City, and what we have seen elsewhere, the nerve gas attack in Tokyo, the slaughter of innocent civilians by those who would destroy the peace in the Middle East, the organized crime now plaguing the former Soviet Union, so much that one of the first requests we get in every one of those countries is, send in the FBI, we need help. The drug cartels in Latin America and Asia that threaten the open societies and the fragile democracies there. All these things we know can emerge from without our borders and from within our borders. Free and open societies are inherently more vulnerable to these kinds of forces. Therefore, we must remain vigilant, reduce our vulnerability, and constantly renew our efforts to defeat them. We work closely with foreign governments. We share intelligence. We provide military support. We initiate anti-corruption and money laundering programs to stop drug trafficking at its source. We've opened an FBI office in Moscow, a training center in Hungary to help combat international organized crime. Over the past 2 years, we've waged a tough counterterrorism campaign, strengthening our laws, increasing manpower and training for the CIA and the FBI, imposing sanctions on states that sponsor terrorism. Many of these efforts have paid off. We were able to arrest and quickly convict those responsible for the World Trade Center bombing, to stop another terrible planned attack in New York, as well as a plan to blow up American civilian airliners over the Pacific, and help to bring to justice terrorists around the world. In the aftermath of Oklahoma City, our top law enforcement officers told us they needed new tools to fight terrorism, and I proposed legislation to provide those tools. More than 1,000 new law enforcement personnel solely working on terrorism, a domestic anti-terrorism center, tough new punishment for trafficking and stolen explosive, for attacking members of the uniformed services or federal workers, the enabling of law enforcement officials to mark explosive materials so they can be more easily traced, the empowering of law enforcement officials with authority to move legal, and I emphasize legal, wiretaps when terrorists quickly move their bases of operation without having to go back for a new court order. And finally, in a very limited way, the authority to use the unique capacity of our military where chemical or biological weapons are involved here at home, just as we now can call on those capabilities to fight nuclear threats. I'm sure every graduate of this academy knows of the Posse Comitatus rule, the clear line that says members of the uniformed military will not be involved in domestic law enforcement. That is a good rule. We should honor that rule. The only narrow exception for it that I know of today is the ability of law enforcement in America to call upon the unique expertise of the military when there is a potential threat of a nuclear weapon in the hands of the wrong people. All we are asking for in the aftermath of the terrible incident in the Tokyo subway is the same access to the same expertise should chemical and biological weapons be involved. The congressional leadership pledged its best efforts to put this bill on my desk by Memorial Day, but Memorial Day has come and gone, and only the Senate has taken the bill up. And even there, in my judgment, there are too many amendments that threaten too much delay. Congress has a full agenda of important issues, including passing a responsible budget. But all this will take time. When it comes to terrorism, time is a luxury we don't have. Some are even now saying we should just go slow on this legislation. Well, Congress has a right to review this legislation to make sure the civil liberties of American citizens are not infringed, and I encourage them to do that. But they should not go slow. Terrorists do not go slow, my fellow Americans. Their agenda is death and destruction on their own timetable, and we need to make sure that we can do everything possible to stop them from succeeding. 6 weeks after Oklahoma City, months after the first anti-terrorism legislation was sent by the White House to Congress, there is no further excuse for delay. Fighting terrorism is a big part of our national security today, and it will be well into the 21st century. And I ask Congress to act and act now. Our obligations to fight these forces of terror is closely related to our efforts to reduce the threat of weapons of mass destruction. All of us, I'm sure, ached and wept with the people of Japan when we saw what a small vial of chemical gas could do when unleashed in the subway station. And we breathed a sigh of relief when the alert officers there prevented the two chemicals from uniting and forming poison which could have killed hundreds and hundreds of people just a few days after that. The breakup of the Soviet Union left nuclear material scattered throughout the newly independent states and increased the potential for the theft of those materials and for organized criminals to enter the nuclear smuggling business. As horrible as the tragedies in Oklahoma City and the World Trade Center were, imagine the destruction that could have resulted had there been a small-scale nuclear device exploded there. The United States will retain as long as necessary an arsenal of nuclear forces to deter any future hostile action by any regime that has nuclear weapons. But I will also continue to pursue the most ambitious agenda to dismantle and fight the proliferation of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction since the dawn of the nuclear age. This effort is succeeding, and we should support it. No Russian missiles are pointed at America. No American missiles are aimed at Russia. Because we put the START I treaty into force, Russia is helping us and joining us in dismantling thousands of nuclear weapons. Our patient, determined diplomacy convinced Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus to give up their weapons when the Soviet Union fell apart. We are cooperating with these nations and others to safeguard nuclear materials and stop their spread. And just last month, we got the indefinite and unconditional extension of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which will benefit not only this generation of Americans, but future generations as well, by preventing scores of countries from developing and acquiring nuclear weapons. More than 170 nations have signed on to this treaty. They vow they will either never acquire nuclear weapons, or if they have them, that they won't help others obtain them, and they will pursue arms control and disarmament. We have to now go even further. There is no excuse for the Senate to go slow on approving two other vital measures, the START II Treaty and the Chemical Weapons Convention. START II will enable us to reduce by 2/3 the number of strategic warheads deployed at the height of the Cold War. The Chemical Weapons Convention requires the destruction of chemical weapons stockpiles around the world and provides severe penalties for those who sell materials to build these weapons to terrorists or to criminals. It would make a chemical terror like the tragic attack in the Tokyo subway much, much more difficult. Both START II and the Chemical Weapons Convention will make every American safer, and we need them now. There is more to do. We're working to complete negotiations on a comprehensive test ban treaty, to implement the agreement we reached with North Korea to freeze and dismantle that country's nuclear program, to strengthen the Biological Weapons Convention. It is an ambitious agenda, but it is worthy of this moment, and it will make your future as officers in the United States Air Force, American citizens, and when your parents and grandparents, more secure. Finally, let me say that none of this will work unless we also are faithful to our obligation to support a strong and adaptable military for the 21st century. The men and women of our armed forces remain the foundation, the fundamental foundation of our security. You put the steel into our diplomacy, you get the job done when all means short of force have been tried and failed. We saw your strength on display in Haiti, where a brutal military regime agreed to step down peacefully only, and I emphasize only, when it learned that more than 60 C-130s and C-141s loaded with paratroopers were in the air and on the way. Now the Haitian people have a second chance to rebuild their nation. We then saw your speed in the Persian Gulf when Iraq massed its troops on the Kuwaiti border and threatened regional instability. I ordered our planes, ships, and troops into the Gulf. You got there in such a hurry that Iraq got out of the way in a hurry. We saw your compassion in Rwanda, where you flew tons of supplies, medicines, and foods into a nation torn apart by violence and saved countless lives. All over the world, you have met your responsibilities with skill and professionalism, keeping peace, making peace, saving lives, protecting American interests. In turn, your country has a responsibility to make sure you have the resources, the flexibility, the tools you need to do the job. We have sought to make good on that obligation by crafting a defense strategy for our time. And I'd like to say here today that one of the principal architects of that strategy was our recently deceased former Defense Secretary, Les Aspin. During his many years in the Congress as head of the Armed Services Committee, as Secretary of Defense, and as head of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, he devoted a lifetime to this country's defense, and we will miss him terribly. And we are very grateful for the legacy he left, a blueprint for reshaping our military to the demands of the 21st century. A blueprint that calls on us to make sure that any force reductions we began at the end of the Cold War do not jeopardize our strength over the long run. That calls on us to provide you with the resources you need to meet the challenges of a world plagued by ancient conflicts and new instabilities. All of you know here that after World War II, a major drawdown left us at a major disadvantage when war broke out in Korea. And just 5 years after the post-Vietnam drawdown in 1980, the Army Chief of Staff declared that we had a hollow army, a view shared by most experts. We have been determined not to repeat those mistakes. Even as we draw down troops, we know we have to be prepared to engage and prevail in two nearly simultaneous major regional conflicts. Some argued that this scenario was unrealistic and excessively demanding. Recent events have proved that they were wrong and shown that we are pursuing the right strategy and the right force levels for these times. Last summer, just before the North Koreans finally agreed to dismantle their nuclear program, we were poised to send substantial air, naval, and ground reinforcements to defend South Korea. Just a few months later, we deployed tens of thousands of troops to the Gulf and placed thousands more on alert. And in between those crises, I gave the go-ahead to the 25,000 troops engaged in Operation Uphold Democracy in Haiti. In Haiti, the operation was especially historic because it was the most fully integrated military plan ever carried out in our history. The four services worked together, drawing on each other's special abilities more than ever before. And for the first time, we were ready to launch Army infantry and an air assault from a Navy aircraft carrier. When we decided to send our troops in peacefully, we did it in hours, not days. That kind of innovation and the ability to do that is what your country owes you as you walk out of this stadium today as officers in the United States Air Force. This then will be our common security mission, yours and mine and all Americans, to take on terrorism, organized crime, and drug trafficking, to reduce the nuclear threat and the threat of biological and chemical weapons, to keep our military flexible and strong. These must be the cornerstones of our program to build a safer America at a time when threats to our security have no respect for boundaries and when the boundaries between those threats are disappearing. Abroad as at home, we must measure the success of our efforts by one simple standard. Have we made the lives of the American people safer? Have we made the future for our children more secure? Let me say to this class, I know that the rewards of serving on the front lines of our foreign policy may seem distant and uncertain at times. 34 years ago, President Kennedy said, "When there is a visible enemy to fight, the tide of patriotism runs high. But when there is a long, slow struggle with no immediate visible foe, your choice will seem hard indeed." Your choice, ladies and gentlemen, to take on the problems and possibilities of this time, to engage the world, not to run from it, is the right choice. As you have learned here at the Academy, it demands sacrifice. In the years ahead, you'll be asked to travel a long way from home, to be away from your loved ones for long stretches of time, to face dangers we perhaps cannot yet even imagine. These are the burdens you have willingly agreed to bear for your country, its safety, and its long-term security. Go forth, knowing that the American people support you, that they admire your dedication, they are grateful for your service, they are counting on you, the class of '95, to lead us into the 21st century, and they believe you truly do represent the best of America. Good luck and Godspeed.
You a gift, Mr. President, so you might as well just stand right there.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Cadet Wing Commander, Cadet First Class Paul F. Spavin.
President Clinton, for your dedicated service to our nation, to the United States Air Force, and to the United States Air Force Academy, it is with great pride that today's graduating class designates you, by acclamation, an honorary member of the United States Air Force Academy's class of 1995. As tangible evidence of this honor, we are very pleased today, sir, to present you with this plaque and saber.
Beautiful. Maybe you can hold it up there.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Air Force Academy Foundation, Mr. William J. Hibble.
Mr. President, on behalf of the trustees of the Air Force Academy Foundation, it's a great pleasure to give you our 1995 Special Award for your participation, your support of the United States Air Force Academy and the United States Air Force.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the Dean of Faculty, Brigadier General Ruben A. Cabero.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome. President Clinton, before presenting the entire graduating class to you, I would like to single out some individuals for special recognition. First, I will call your attention to 73 distinguished graduates who are listed at the top of your program. These cadets, by their overall performance, have placed in the top 7% of their class and have demonstrated true excellence in accomplishing the academic, athletic, and military requirements for graduation. If we observed the custom of academic honors, each would be graduating summa cum laude. Instead, we use the term distinguished graduate, as most fitting in its promise of distinguished service to the nation. At this time, will the class of 1995 distinguished graduates please rise and be recognized? Thank you. Now, with the exception of the number one graduate, please be seated. Mr. President, I'd like to point out that for the second time in the history of the Academy, the number one distinguished graduate is an international student. I am delighted to recognize at this time Cadet First Class Chung Guan Lo from Singapore. Cadet Lo, you may be seated. Identified in the program with a star by their names are cadets graduating with academic distinction. These cadets, by their cumulative academic performances, have placed in the top 10% of their class. Those identified in the program with a circle beside their names are cadets graduating with military distinction. The cumulative military performances of these cadets have placed them in the top 10% of the class. Those exceptional cadets graduating with both academic and military distinction are identified in the program by a star within a circle. We are also pleased to have in this class of graduates 11 international students representing the nations of Colombia, El Salvador, Honduras, Morocco, Pakistan, Peru, Singapore, Thailand, and Turkey. Will our 11 international students please rise and be recognized? Thank you, and be seated. Today, a total of 987 Air Force Academy cadets in this year's class have completed all graduation requirements. I present to you, President Clinton, the United States Air Force Academy class of 1995 and recommend each to you as worthy of the Bachelor of Science degree. Thank you.
President Clinton will join me in presenting the diplomas to the graduates of the class of 1995. Will the distinguished graduates please rise and come forward? Chung Guan Lo, the #1 cadet in overall performance. Paul Michael Morton. Varun Pruiri. Zachariah Emil Patrick. Margaret Ellen Coffey. Wendell Scott Herzl. Ka Wang Tom. Alan Brian Adams. Naresh Harishan Shaw. The #1 cadet academically, Douglas Paul Wickert. Jeffrey Scott Smith. Robert Scott Wacker. Sean Thomas Cochran. Todd Jeffrey Johnston. David John Abrahamson. Brandon Cord Cohee. Mark John Malarkey. Jonna Suzanne Kokkonen. Barrett Taylor McCann. Matthew Scott Van Weeren. Dennis Scott Rand. Michael James Benson. Brian Michael Fitzgerald. Michael Philip Anderson. Wade Travis Gordon. Brian Robert Joseph. Thomas Richard Ulmer. Kyle Matthew Rockers. Scott Anthony Kane. Travis Donald Rex. Theodore Allen Bruker. David Martin Mahalik. Leonard David Cabrera. Jeffrey Daniel Barchers. Amanda Lynn Krantz. Douglas Carl Vanderkoy. Rolf Eric Lundmark. Celeste Micheline Colvin. David Raphael McDaniel. Solomon Muhammad Aslam. Lauren Matthew Jones. Jason Montgomery Spees. Alexander Sanson. Russell D. Driggers. Bryce Johnny Lee Williams. Christopher Robert Keeling. Ryan Joseph Welch. Bridget Ann Barton. Luke Christopher G. Cropsey. Henry Frederick Kuhlman III. Greta Eloisa Slitter. Michael Shane Garrett. Mark Eric Burns. Mirali Krishnan. Philip Raymond Donovan. Philip Anderson White, Jr. Karen Lynn Thomas. Eric Howard McKinney. Stephen Gregory England. Charles Joseph Pena Podolak. Jason Michael Brown. Toby John Browlier. Trevor Banks Benetton. Anthony Khalil Haynes. Paul Christopher Landis. Stephen Edward Masita. Wendy Lynn Moore. Walter Curtis Hattemer. Ian Dodd Smith. Adam D. Riemann. Paul Frederick Spavin. James Jeremy Marsh. Michael Lee Matisick. Ladies and gentlemen, to your right, the Honorable Sheila E. Widnall, Secretary of the Air Force, and to your left, Lieutenant General Paul E. Stein, Superintendent of the United States Air Force Academy. Will the remainder of the graduating class of 1995 please rise and come forward to receive your diplomas? Cadet Squadron 1, Christian John Bisbano.
Joshua Peter Bobko.
Noel Richard Bouchard.
Brian L. Bradford.
Frank Deal Bryant, Jr.
Thomas Richard Colvin.
Jeffrey Michael Dambra.
Jeremy Stephen Durchie.
Keenan Tillman Dutton.
Donald Eugene English, Jr.
Paul William Feidinger,
David Michael Leopold,
Kevin Matthew Magaleta,
Glenn Hunter McAdams,
Peter Greg Michelson,
Kevin Lewis Mosley,
James Patrick Moss,
Grant Joseph Simmons,
Tammy Lynn Smith,
Shane Douglas Steinke,
Peter James Swanson,
Ricardo L. Tremillos,
Adam Scott Veely,
Daniel Joseph Wasilowski,
Cadet Squadron 2, Adam Douglas Anderson,
Daniel Patrick Boyd,
Matthew Michael Callow,
John Michael Denny,
Robert Matthew Enninger,
Gerald Richard Fortuna Jr.,
Matthew James Gebhardt,
Nicholas Ogden Gutman,
Jeffrey Thomas Haynes,
Joseph John Jaworski III,
James Richard Lamar,
Stephen George Malott,
Megan Kathleen Monahan,
Drew Douglas Morrison,
Douglas Addison Musselman,
Jessica Joy Olson,
James Ernest Platt Jr.,
Julie Christine Price,
Andrew Jason Ridland,
John Brent Singleton,
Kistner Yvonne Stevenson,
Tara Lynn Sweeney,
Clay Robert Tebby,
Jeremy David Turner,
Brian Joseph Wickering,
Cadet Squadron 3, Mamet Akcha,
Matthew Frederick Barchi,
Brett Roy Blake,
Richard John Bolender,
Eric Brinker Brown,
Marcus Allen Cheney,
Chad Eric Foyt,
Christian Raymond Fitzpatrick,
Terry Audrey Heitmeyer,
Brandon Robert Horn,
Curtis Bernard Hudson,
Charles Lee Jones,
Aaron Arnold Lade,
Stephen Torleif Lygren,
Chad Lee Meyerling,
Jason Michael Ogren,
Jason Richard Palma,
Marcus Lee Roberts,
Lee David Roskop,
David Hugo Sanchez,
Stephen William Strasbaugh,
Bradley Dwayne Tidd,
Kristen Lynn Vanderberg,
Cadet Squadron 4, Craig Simeon Bedard,
Brian Allen Blind,
Fiat Tebui,
Todd Daniel Fry,
Thierry Goen,
Celianne Marie Gonzalez,
William Paul Griffiths,
Daniel Brent Halstead,
Tanya Ray Hauber,
Joshua Leonard Hetzko,
Michael Joseph May,
James Ray Moore,
Margaret Elizabeth Morris,
Daryl Kenneth Phillipson,
Brendan Jeffrey Rowe,
Bradley Allen Sager,
Alan Locke Stewart,
Troy M. Toosme,
William Matthew Young,
Cadet Squadron 5, John Thomas Alpeter,
Cadet Squadron 5,
Kevin Thomas
Paul
Dam.
Richard Berzinski.
Janelle Inez Higuena.
Charles Michael Drouillard.
Martin Hahn.
James Richard Hackbarth.
Jason Christopher Lindgren.
I do too. Tanya Elisa Hurwitz.
John Daniel Mallard.
Kelly Scott Lauder.
Gavin Young McDaniel.
Brian Thomas Malone.
David Michael Nikos.
Nathan Michael Miller.
Christy Ann Porterfield.
Manuel Paul Perez.
James Sheridan Rowley.
Juan Arnez Robinson.
Douglas Hillary Thurston.
Thomas Charles Sorochin.
Christopher J. Zulke.
Max Clifford Weems. Cadet Squadron 6. Kristen Elizabeth Abbott.
Sandra Conchita Acosta.
Michael Durham Allen.
Scott Edward Carroll.
Joseph M. Cotero.
Keith Irwin Crawford.
Eric Bruce Doss.
Trevor Michael Davis.
Donnie Kang.
Matthew Allen List.
Bidet Oswald Lopez Jr.
William James Marr.
Robert Anthony Masitis.
James Avery McHenry.
Kevin John Merrill.
Brian Joseph Murphy.
Sang W. Park.
Julie Ann Pilkington.
Green Donald Royster IV.
Thomas Preston Seymour.
Jason Lee Smith.
Philip Ray Stewart.
Stephen James Stumbo.
John Keith Tinsley.
Christopher George Tyler.
Antoinette Johnson Valero.
Cadet Squadron 7. Robert Todd Bollinger.
Timothy Han Soo Buck.
Daniel Dwayne Bush.
Brandon Lee Cuffey.
Fred Tomas Damuth.
Christopher Hall.
Michael Robin Henkelman.
Zachary Nicholas Hess.
Thomas Lee Johnson.
Erica Lane Jones.
Nicole Marie Kennedy.
Jeffrey Todd Kronwitter.
Robert Franklin Lockwood Jr.
Michael Stephen Miller.
David Joseph Moreland.
Joseph Troy Morgan.
James Ward Myers Jr.
Robert William O'Neill.
Deborah Renee Olson.
Mark David Piper.
Timothy William Thurston II.
Luis Alfredo Torres.
Ryan Lee Turner.
Jeffrey Robert Weeks.
Cadet Squadron 8. Renee Conrad Ernst Adlam.
Richard Anthony Carroll.
Christian Francis Sunick.
Suzanne Michelle Dean.
Christopher Robert Delahanty.
Joseph Michael Dingman.
Stephen Horst Drollinger.
Gerald Gutierrez Gallegos.
Brian Thomas Jackson.
Stephen Gino Laris.
Andrew Thomas Lyons.
Julie Michelle Martin.
Stuart Charles Martin.
Oswald George Medley Jr.
Nicholas William Meyer.
Anthony Khan Nishimura.
Natalie Carol Herter Schwaney.
Peter John Sheridan.
Michael Robert Staples.
Ronald Patrick Story Jr.
James Oscar Tuomi.
Jason Todd Ward.
Eric James Zimmer.
Cadet Squadron 9. Jenna Elizabeth Barash.
Michael Herbert Barton.
Eric Athanasi Kagan.
John Paul Callahan.
Johnny Mack Irwin.
Chrissy Dawn Fitzgerald.
Mario Fox Baker.
Timothy Walter Gillespie.
Marcus Howard Gregory.
David Ray Hauk.
Gerard Eugene Jurgensen.
Eric Michael Cooper.
Miles Laurent Matthew.
Francesco Antonio Fout.
Craig Leslie Pritchard.
Scott Patrick Rupert.
William Patrick Salmon.
James Allen Sharts.
Sam Jose Van Zanten.
Lisa Ann Barsons.
Cadet Squadron 10. Chad Anthony Belletti.
Renardo McKay Brown.
Jamie Lynn Dahlgren.
Jason Dow Gooch.
Nathan Allen Ingerhart.
Louis Kilala Guillermo.
Chad Price Green.
John Robert Morrow.
Carl Francis Cook.
Nicole Heather Rady.
Travis Larson Pacheco.
Warren Baird Sneed.
Stephen Thomas Sanders. John C. Spitzer.
Ladies and gentlemen, to your right, the Honorable Roy C. Romer, Governor of the State of Colorado, and to your left, General Ronald R. Fogelman, Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. Cadet Squadron 11, William Scott Angerman.
David Ralph Buchanan.
Karen Elizabeth Denham.
Brian Lane Dyer.
Seth Charles Frank.
Christopher David Grosjean.
Mark Dale Hollinsworth.
Ricardo Terrence James.
Dean Patrick Janke.
Sam Christopher Johnson.
Janelle Malia Jones.
Brent Tom Langholz.
Michael Patrick Lyons.
Rebecca Ellen Mason.
Jeffrey Luther Myers.
Raymond G. Malero.
Regina Marie Reinhardt,
Thomas Joseph Rose,
Christopher Michael Scora,
Adam Joseph Stone,
Stephen Donald Tribble,
William Heath Wharton,
Cadet Squadron 12, Richard Wayne Armstrong,
William Arthur Barrington Jr.,
Renee Marie Bartolone,
Dane Benton Crawford,
Kenneth Daniel Jonah,
Daniel Christopher Gunn,
Jeremy Lee Hilton,
Christopher Gerard Hummel,
Michelle Giovanni Johnson,
Dwight Ferrer Cuneo,
Mark Allen Lindsay,
Nicholas John Martin,
Richard Marshall Murray,
John Michael Nimachek,
Donald William Reimer,
Eric Michael Ringelberg,
Jennifer Ann Rollins,
Jonathan Paul Shear,
Kevin Glenn Weaver,
Cadet Squadron 13, Valentine Scott Arbogast,
Jeremy Allen Barrett,
Dylan Saul Baumgartner,
Nicholas Paul Capitosto,
Hubert Charles Cathlin,
Brian Lance Clinton,
Jason William Costello,
James Robbie Culpepper,
James Matthew Gorday,
Matthew Shane Kenton,
William Ray Kuykendall,
Craig Robert Lucy,
Jason Ryan Loon,
Brian Wade McDonald,
Shumsher Singh Man,
Eric David Mulder,
Christopher Thomas Recker,
Tamara Sharon Rivers,
Christopher John Wertnan,
Elizabeth Eileen Young,
Cadet Squadron 14, Charles Henry Baker,
Rex Michael Ballinger,
Michael Robert Brevard,
James Allen Dawson Jr.,
William Stewart Denham,
Tara Lynn Dickinson,
James Edward Friedland,
Karen Ann Henchett,
Boyd Belding Haugen,
George Hatton Hawk Jr.,
Peter Allen Kerr,
Keisha Camille Lafayette,
Christopher Leo Lowell,
Thomas Edward Murphy II,
Angel Miguel Negron,
Jason Lawrence Plord,
Kurt Paul Rouser,
Alicia Ann Valeni,
Wade Allen Wegner,
John Derek Wilcox,
Paul Christopher Wood,
Cadet Squadron 15, Patrick Wilson Albrecht,
Brian Todd Baldwin,
Sean D. Bernardini,
Jess William Drab,
Justin Lee Fletcher,
Mark Bradford Foley,
Stephanie Diane Hallcrow,
Peter Donald Lohman,
John Todd Mazer,
Michael Brian McClanahan,
Emmett Andrew McClintock,
Preston Jock McConnell,
Matthew Allen Melanie,
Brad Scott Mitchelltree,
Jesus Anthony Ramos,
Michael Scott Rimsky,
Jeremiah Thomas Rogers.
Dion Yolanda Rowland.
Robert Allen Vitas.
Brian Keith Watkins.
Timothy Gene Waller.
Eric Matthew Yape.
Cadet Squadron 16, Ronald Horst Bearsons.
Michael Todd Bolin.
Jennifer Lynn Buss.
James Edward Collins II.
Jonathan Lewis Doolin.
Guillermo Jose Estrada.
David Paul Hayworth.
Amy Lynn Hulton.
Christopher David Jones.
D.J. Kotzer.
Alvin Dana Kelly.
Jason Anthony Macian.
Daniel Patrick McAllister.
Paul Daniel Moga.
Brian Mark Patchen.
Tamara Lynn Prassi.
William Chad Riggleman.
Stephen Andrew Simcoe.
Scott Arthur Trinrud.
Paul Kenneth Waring.
Sean Thomas Welsh.
Cadet Squadron 17. Jason Christopher Anderson.
Brian Yates Barty.
David Campion Brackney.
Robert James Bradeen Jr.
William Halsey Burks.
Douglas Stewart Cameron.
David Bradley Harden.
Christopher Eric Howell.
Joseph Daniel Kent.
Robert Edward Kitterson.
Matthew Edward Convalin.
Andrew Carter Harrington Leon.
Jiro Brubaker McCoy.
Timothy Burke Pitching.
Eddie Lee Young.
Cadet Squadron 18. Paul Christopher Bake.
Michael John Bachtel.
Mark Andrew Carlson.
Brock Eaton DeVos.
Clarence Michael Dunnigan IV.
Rennie James Fujiwara.
Russell Landrum Hicks.
Joel Elliott Higley.
Donald Anthony Jones.
Christopher Philip Knowles.
Tanya Michelle Land.
Michael L. Leckix.
Nathaniel Paul Lockwood.
Toby Joe Lofton.
James Scott Mallory.
Brian Lamont Patterson.
John McClinton Roan.
J. Anthony Sabia.
Frederick Hagan Sellers.
David Daniel Sundlove.
David Lewis Tomlinson.
Jeffrey Joel White.
Cadet Squadron 19. Philip Francis Akuwaro.
Jason Roy Atkins.
Benjamin Caleb Booth.
Wilfredo Roberto Contreras.
Catherine Mary Dulac.
Robert Eugene Dunkel III.
Daniel Lawrence Gable.
Trevor John Hawk.
Ryan Christopher Hill.
Philip Lee Inman.
Ronald Lazelle Levy II.
Shannon Elaine McLean.
Jeffrey Scott McGurk.
Christopher James Nagy.
Dennis Parker.
David Charles Salisbury.
Ryan Paul Shiwi.
Dezo Vincent Salaji II.
John Scott Truby.
Lance Frederick Turner.
Michael Jonathan Waite.
Reagan Kyle Whitlow.
Cadet Squadron 20, Juliana Adair.
Audrey Elizabeth Alcorn.
Sherry Jade Aruda.
Christopher Eric Austin.
Robert D. Beam.
Kyle Douglas Brown.
Barry Adam Burns.
Joshua Lee Christian.
Christopher Kenneth Ederle.
John William Eller.
Christopher Ferretti.
Christopher Patrick Ingleton.
Jeffrey Allen Johnson.
Jeremy Adam Kruger.
Benjamin Raoul Maitre.
Shannon Scott McDonald.
Jeremiah Robert Monk.
Robert Larry Nance.
Evan Samuel Pitts.
Clinton Andrew Ross.
Thomas Peter Sherman.
Britt Harold Singleton.
Timothy Nathan Tart, Jr.
Todd Christopher Virgil.
Ladies and gentlemen, to your right, the Honorable Jim Ramstad, U.S. Representative, State of Minnesota, and to your left, Brigadier General John D. Hopper, Jr., Commandant of Cadets. Cadet Squadron 21, Joseph Lee Adams III.
Douglas Harold Bartles.
Stephen Michael Boatwright.
Kevin Daniel Clark.
Kimberly Elizabeth Devereaux.
Jonathan Robert Eckerman.
Michael Joseph Flynn, Jr.
J. Travis Garnett.
Brian Craig Green.
Keith Brian Green.
Nicole Marie Gumina.
Eric Anthony Herbick.
Stacy Lee Krakis.
Jamie David Lindman.
Blake Douglas Matthews.
Michael Wayne Miranda.
Christopher Orrin Rested.
Michael John Simon.
Jennifer Smith.
Mark Jason Smith.
Forrest Van Soper.
William David Tallman.
Robert William Truax.
Justin Harris Trumbo.
Stephen Douglas Walker.
Carl Dieter Zerbrug.
Cadet Squadron 22, David Andrew Hamonette.
Eve Meredith Burke.
Edward Daniel Casey.
Marcus Anthony Dominguez.
Joel Frank England.
Lawrence Carey Gunn III.
Nicholas Joseph Hegarty.
Christopher Stephen Keene.
Philip Martin Kirshner, Jr.
Christine Marie Carrick.
Christopher Lee Lambert.
Norman Leon Lee II.
Anthony Blaine Mulhare.
Stephen G. Owen.
Philip Ray Parker Jr.
Douglas Kenneth Rothenhofer.
Todd Andrew Sherm.
Kevin Lynn Sellers.
William Edward Simons II.
Michael Christopher Thody.
David James Walsh.
Andrew Keenan Wyatt.
Kevin Lamont Williams.
David Arnold Williamson.
Cadet Squadron 23, Jason Eugene Bailey.
Larry Eldridge Baker Jr.
Kimberly Deneen Betts.
Kyle Edward Carpenter.
Jonathan Lee Corey.
Charles Robert Koznowski.
Jason Douglas Decker.
Robert Allen Goddard.
Darren Michael Hamilton.
Glenn Todd Harris.
Frederick James Lacey IV.
Perry Lloyd McKeithen.
Anthony F. Mirabile.
Andrea Elvira Rolfe.
Keel Loy Ross.
Jerry Dean Sanchez.
Scott Lyle Shacklet.
J. Bong Sim.
Michael William Snodgrass.
Wallace Rutherford Turnbull.
Jonathan Edward Veazey.
Daniel Robert Wilcox.
Ryan Eugene Werner.
Cadet Squadron 24, Robert Coleman Barnett.
Jason Harold Beers.
Brad Elliott Byer.
Bo Otto Christian Billick.
Robert McGee Buick.
Norman Anthony Burrows.
Lee Edward Chase.
David Michael Cobb.
Alejandro Cato.
Brian William Dixon.
Eric John Halverson.
Aaron Lee Hartzler.
Kevin Scott Johnson.
Christopher Evan Kibble.
Kareem Kenneth Lazarus.
Chell Norwood Lindgren.
Michael Allen Mills.
Kristen Marie Palmer.
Susan Elizabeth Phillips.
Frederick Trevor Portis.
Alan Ray Springston.
Amanda Jean Steffi.
Matthew Calvin Travis.
Clifton Patrick Volpe.
Monique Nicole West.
Cadet Squadron 25, James Ross Alexander.
Damon Alexander Anthony.
Kevin Joseph Barrett.
Kevin Knight Craddock.
Eric Davis.
Joseph Michael DeFeedy.
Scott Cameron Evers.
Timothy Dirk Fleetstraw.
Eric Paul Godelfer.
Jeffrey Michael Hermanson.
Gregory Edward Hopkins.
Melissa Joy Highland.
Julian R. Jarosh.
Zia Kabasako.
Eric Evan Krebs.
David John Lyle.
Francis Carl Miller.
Bong Don Win.
John Frederick Peak.
Ruth Ann Rumfelt.
Brian Michael Wall.
Jason Brian Wersbanowski.
Cadet Squadron 26. Matthew Huntley Adams.
Stephen Scott Alexander.
Adam David Benjamin.
Michael Victor Betancourt.
Robert Kenneth Carlson.
Sean K. Gradney.
Mark Patrick Hansen.
Michael Dale Johnston.
Matthew John Kaufman.
Jason Bradford Lamb.
Jerome Michael Ledzinski II.
Henry Robert McNeil III.
Trevor William Miller.
John Frederick Murray.
William Joseph Prosanka.
George Rivera.
Jeffrey Paul Souza.
Keith Edward Serwick. Peter Allen Wennell.
Christopher J. Van Kesteren. Cadet Squadron 27. Matthew Stephen Bade.
Bernard Bedgood II.
Joshua Delaney Bowman.
Michael Edward Brock.
Gregory Brandon Coleman.
George Anthony Culver.
Jason Swayze Dukes.
Derek Michael Gabbard.
John Marshall Groves.
Court O'Neill Hacker.
Bo John Jensen.
John James Joyce IV.
Peter Noel Kelly.
Andrea Cora Kirkman.
Mark Daniel Lewis.
Greg J. Mallon.
Nicole Renee Robertson.
Stephen William Russ.
Timothy Hugh Russell.
Brian Edward Centrelli.
Jonathan David Schultz.
Jason Andrew Smith.
Derek John Allen Younger.
Cadet Squadron 28. Chad Benjamin Bondurant.
Christopher Buckley.
Jason Wayne Evanson.
William Joseph Friday Jr.
Benjamin William Glazer.
Stephen William Klingman.
Richard Travis Cope.
Matthew Lillian Stolpe.
Derek Russell Miller.
John David Norton.
David Robert O'Malley.
Ainsworth McLaren O'Reilly.
Michael Stewart Pugh.
Blake Conley Rogers.
Robert Carl Rossi.
Owen Todd Shipler.
Ryan Monroe Sparkman.
Stephen Frederick Spiegel.
Joel Wayne Stevens.
Christopher Drake Thompson.
Stacy Annette Wharton.
Jerome K. White.
Cadet Squadron 29. Jason Jared Baker.
Chad Allen Bushman.
Daniel Arthur DeVoe.
Travis Martin Elkins.
Joshua Benjamin Fallon.
Julie Christie Griffith,
Gordon Scott Hunter,
Christopher Brant Jones,
Otis Christopher Jones,
Travis Everett Lippert,
Ty David Little,
Edward Patrick Locke,
Todd Peter McClure,
Adam Jason Myers,
Christopher James Mills,
Brian Arthur Schnitker,
Christopher Alex Tumalowitz,
Keith Ray Turner,
Thomas Jason Walker,
Stephen Duff Weir,
Tracy Joe Wilcox,
Cadet Squadron 30, Louis Cyril Olden,
Kenyon Kareem Bell,
Michael Robert Black,
Dermott John Cole,
Frank Arthur Delsing,
Jose Cruz Garcia Morales,
Thomas Allen Geiser,
Billy Shannon Gladen,
Richard Gray Hansen,
Paul John Hoffman,
Jason Allen Lamont,
Joseph Wade Locke,
William Matthew Lowe,
Kevin Burke Massey,
Mark Calvin McCraney,
Darren Bradley Neal,
Paul August Northen,
Carmine Joseph Punziano,
Lisa Ann Purell,
Brian Matthew Schaefer,
Tanya Catherine Simon,
Alan Frederick Thode,
Matthew Earl Wall, Ladies and gentlemen, to your right, the Honorable Deborah R. Lee, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs, and to your left, Brigadier General Ruben A. Cabero, Dean of the Faculty.
Cadet Squadron 31, Matthew David Albright,
Nathaniel Doddridge Barnes,
Adam Lee Kramer,
Gerald Alexander Donahue,
Jeffrey Brian Edwards,
Abdurrahim El Hamoumi,
Derek Ross Furland,
Jason Stewart Fisk,
Edward Robert Harvey,
Sean John Hocuff,
the number 1 cadet militarily, Douglas Lynn Johns,
David Adrian McCaleb,
David Christopher McMartin,
Quintessa Miller,
Sean Taylor Milliken,
Richard Arthur Mott,
Sean Michael O'Donnell,
Jennifer Lee Parenti,
Adam Kyle Reedy,
Jason Thomas Michel,
Melvin Bryce Simpson,
Mark Sotolero,
Ernest Leroy Weirin Jr.,
Kevin Andrew Whitaker,
Travis Scott Wilds,
Cadet Squadron 32, Gary Don Bean,
Matthew John Beure,
Laura Colleen Boosie.
Justin Zacchaeus Brizuela,
Scott Allen Burrows.
Colin James Connor,
Joseph Anthony Conti.
Grady Allen Dunham,
Raquel Colleen Early.
Todd Daniel Fleming,
James William Fuchs.
Stephen Michael Hathaway,
Edward Charles Hopkins.
Joel Wayne Janae,
Christian David Kane.
Cheryl Ann Lamoureux,
Jamie Stewart Layton.
Sean Tobin McMaster,
Timothy Patrick Murphy.
Hongbao Min Nguyen,
James Patrick Olson.
William Andrew Ormiston,
J. Edmund Pelka.
David Giles Rankin,
Andrew Frederick Robert.
Sean Robert Slaughter,
Juan Aurelio Velasco.
James David Zwire,
Cadet Squadron 33. William Edward Baird, Jr.
Troy Derek Beelan,
Stephen Patrick Boarding.
Richard Brian Christensen,
James Michael Claiborne.
Jason James Cockrum,
Roy William Collins.
Carlos Delapiani,
Anthony Terry DiCarlo.
Deidre Danelle Fogel,
Scott Allen Grundle.
Jonathan Andrew Hamby,
Christopher Nicholas Leontis.
David Ramirez Jr.,
Tika Jokote Roba.
James Allen Runty,
Jason Robert Sanderson.
Brian Andrew Smith,
Andrew John Stryker.
Brittany Demond Stewart,
Timothy David Strumbaugh.
Elizabeth Kent Templeton,
Robert C. Teschner.
Timothy Glenn Treglin,
Andrew Francis Veneri.
Brian Andrew Wepa,
Paul James Wilson.
Cadet Squadron 34, Alejandro Antunes,
William David Betts.
Trana LaSalle Clemens,
Kevin James Cook.
Sean Michael Cotter,
Eric Sloan Crawford.
J. David Castine,
Jackie Lee Day.
April Sabina Drew,
Richard Lee Fletcher.
Cordis H. Foster,
Franklin D. Gaylord II.
Gabriel James Grease,
Jason James Levant.
Nicholas Edward McFalls,
Andre Edward Mitchell.
Naranchai Nimitbunanan.
Brian Dean Oswald.
Matthew James Sandelier.
Gilbert Warren Sanders.
Alfred Charles Schmutzer III.
Cadet Squadron 35, Obiasili Hugh Eliakudo.
Lee Gilman Bergfeld.
Thomas Arthur Bryan.
Scott Christopher Campbell.
Michael Anthony Curley.
Michael Louis DeRosa.
Shuria James Frickle.
Jennifer Lee Grant.
Michael John Halleck.
Jason Douglas Hauser.
Donald Prost Jones.
Douglas Frank Kaupa.
Donald Ray Manabaugh.
Joseph Thomas Marcinick.
Elizabeth Ann May.
Jennifer Renee Patterson.
David Lawson Pike.
Mark Edward Kleiman.
Patrick Andrew Coley.
Elizabeth Ann Josephine Rowland.
Pamela Dawn Roos.
John Thomas Salance II.
Andrew Thomas Smearsich.
Tony Ann Terhune.
Michael Evan Thompson.
Kevin Michael Wells.
Paul Michael Wojtowicz.
Cadet Squadron 36. Philip Vernon Carlson.
Sean Edward Conrady.
Bonnie Lane Cox.
Chad Jeffrey Davis.
John Lyndon Decker.
Jonathan David Fontenot.
John Carlos Frazier.
Jeffrey Michael Gibson.
Ronnie Charles Hall.
James Charles Hushcroft.
Travis Lee Ingberg.
Jeremy Jerome Johnson.
Catherine Nasil Keneally.
David Brian Kincaid.
George Joseph Kriz II.
Matthew Brady Lewis.
Vincent Alexander Mankus.
Timothy J. Ruderman.
Daniel Brian Schrag.
Paul Gerard Songi.
Nathan John Vogel.
Cadet Squadron 37. David Wade Abba.
Michael Eric Allen.
Rex Owen Ayers.
David Peter Bonin.
Kenneth Hugh Butler Jr.
Stephen Garrick Coy.
Aaron Douglas Drake.
Bradley Alton Glenn.
Nathan Edward Graver.
Derek Calvin Ham.
David Jeffrey Hamill.
Johnny Harrison Jr.
Mark Allen Hickman.
Kevin Dallin Hubert.
Julianne Johnson.
Sunny Youngmin Kim.
Timothy Akio Cordova.
Matthew Alvin Cosma.
Garrett Michael Lowe.
Michael James Luke III.
Corbett Coy McGotra.
Heather Lynn McGinnis.
Michael John Fingston.
Michael Edwin Phillips.
Kevin Barry Price.
Stephen Gardner Renee.
Carla Kathleen Rudert.
James Paul Ryan.
Cadet Squadron 38, Alan Philip Parker.
Christopher Brian Bassam.
John Vandeman Blackman.
John Ernest Bremer Jr.
Gretchen Elizabeth Bronson.
John Valentine Clune.
Cheryl Christina Cobb.
Nathaniel Eugene Cousins.
Elizabeth Suzanne Dow.
Kenneth Robert Izenga.
Thomas Joseph Gillen.
Lincoln Barrett Hill.
Justin Robert Hoffman.
Thomas Rudolph Irvin.
Michael Andrew Jackson.
Tristan Tull Lai.
Christopher Thomas Lesnick.
John August Norton.
Robin Jerry Russell.
Torrance Marty Sanford.
Jeffrey David Searcy.
Sean Allen Simmons.
Jason Michael Tone.
Brian Lewis Bandura.
Edward Melvin Wooten III.
Cadet Squadron 39. Rachel Lynn Beecham.
Joshua Todd Boatwright.
Sean Michael Carey.
Scott Robert Cerrone.
Christopher Scott Dean.
Michael James Edwards.
William Richard Forster.
Michael David Fooch.
Stephen James Garowski.
Jennifer Maria Hardman.
Adam Guy Harris.
Paul Robert Jones.
Sean Edward Leonard.
David Dale Leroy.
Harmon Stanton Lewis Jr.
Kimberly Lynn Lipscomb.
Christopher Vaughn Maddox.
Stanley Job Ness.
Robert Sterling Risco.
Luell Baraz Skinner.
John Mark Sneeringer.
Trung Hong Tran.
Wesley Lamarck Turner.
Matthew Ferguson Wadd.
Matthew Randall Whitney.
Jason Walter Robluski.
Cadet Squadron 40. Thomas Paolo John Angelo.
Marcus Ray Blakely, Jr.
Daniel R. Burke.
John Edward Bryant.
Matthew Keith Carter.
Christopher Allen Claus.
Dana Lee Dallas.
Chadwick Forsyth Fager.
Curtis Todd Green.
Robert Grant Hacking.
Nathan M. Hansen.
Nathaniel Graham Hicks.
Robert Bactel Jaime.
Jason Elwin Malloy.
Michael Ray McDonald.
Sean Kelsey McManus.
Jason Gregory Moore.
Michael Scott Morris.
Eric Angel Rivera.
Matthew Aaron Rosenbaum.
Tanya Jean Schnorr.
Daniel Raymond Sigmund.
David Eric Thompson.
Martin Keith Topping.
Keith Leo Umlauf.
Jeffrey Dean Watson.
Brett Adam Wenninger.
Graduates in wing, Tange Hut. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise. Ladies and gentlemen, the Commandant of Cadets, Brigadier General John D. Hopper, Jr.
Graduates of the class of 1995, will you please raise your right hand and signify your acceptance of the oath of office by saying, "I do." Do each of you, having been appointed a second lieutenant, United States Air Force, solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which you're about to enter, so help you God. Ladies and gentlemen, the Air Force song. Class of 1995, you're dismissed.
great.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I've given them to my kids now for 5 years.